A violent coughing fit shook Lillian Taylor's frail body as the flickering oil lamp cast long shadows across the sparse cabin, illuminating the fearful faces of her 4 children huddled together on the worn-out quilt. This harsh winter of 1879 had been merciless to the young widow, striking her down with pneumonia when her little ones needed her most. "Mama," 6-year-old Emma whispered, her small hand reaching out to touch Lillian's burning forehead. "Are you going to get better today?" Lillian tried to smile, but another cough rattled through her chest. At 32, she'd already weathered more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. First losing her husband Thomas to a mining accident 2 years prior, then struggling to maintain their small homestead outside Alpine, Texas, with 4 young children depending solely on her. "Just need rest, sweet pea," she managed between labored breaths, her eyes drifting to her other children, 8-year-old Jacob, 4-year-old Sarah, and 2-year-old Michael, all watching her with worried expressions too mature for their tender ages. The sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin made Lillian's heart race. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially in the depths of winter. The children froze, remembering their mother's warnings about strangers. "Jacob," she whispered, "look through the window. Careful now." The boy slipped to the frost-covered glass, standing on tiptoe. "It's a man, Mama, on a big horse. He's got supplies." A firm knock rattled the door. Lillian struggled to sit up but fell back against her pillow, dizzy from the effort. "Hello, anyone home?" "Name's Frank Zimmerman, coming from Alpine with supplies from Doc Wilson." Lillian nodded weakly to Jacob, who hesitantly unlatched the door. A blast of cold air swept in along with a tall figure bundled in a thick sheepskin coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. The stranger stomped snow from his boots before removing his hat, revealing a weathered face with kind blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard flecked with silver despite his seemingly young age. Lillian guessed him to be in his mid-30s, perhaps a few years older than herself. "Madam," he said, nodding respectfully as he took in the scene: the sick woman, the frightened children, the nearly empty woodbin, and the meager supplies on the kitchen shelf. His expression softened further. "Doc sent me with medicine and provisions. Said you hadn't been to town in nearly 3 weeks. Frank set down a large sack and pulled out several parcels. "Got quinine, willow bark, and some of Mrs. Wilson's chicken broth. The doc's worried about you, madam." "Thank you," Lillian whispered, her voice hoarse. "How much do I owe?" Frank waved away her question. "Nothing at all. Community looks after its own out here." He glanced at the dwindling fire. "Your woodpile looks mighty low. Mind if I chop some before heading back?" Before Lillian could answer, little Michael toddled over to the stranger, looking up at him with curious eyes. "Horse?" he asked hopefully. Frank's stern face cracked into a warm smile. "Got the finest pinto this side of the Pecos, little man. Name's Thunder. Maybe when your mama's feeling better, I can take you for a ride." For the next hour, Frank Zimmerman moved efficiently around the small homestead, chopping enough wood to last several days, tending to Lillian's 2 milk cows, and even preparing a simple stew that filled the cabin with savory aromas the children hadn't smelled in weeks. As dusk approached, Lillian watched him through fever-glazed eyes. "Mr. Zimmerman, I can't thank you enough, but you should head back before darkness falls." Frank looked out the window at the swirling snow, then back to the frail woman and her wide-eyed children, his jaw set with determination. "Mrs. Taylor, with all due respect, that storm's picking up something fierce. Wouldn't be safe for man nor beast to head out now." He hesitated. "If it's proper, I'd be obliged to bed down in your barn tonight. Come morning, I'll head back to town and return with the doctor." What Lillian didn't realize that evening, as she drifted into a fitful sleep with the comforting sounds of her children being tended by capable hands, was that Frank Zimmerman's one night of shelter would extend far beyond the passing storm. The next morning, Frank rose before dawn, preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal for the children before checking on Lillian. Her fever had worsened overnight, her breathing now a concerning rattle. "Mrs. Taylor," he said gently, helping her sip some water. "I'm heading to town for the doctor right away. The children will be fine until we return." Lillian's fingers weakly clutched his wrist. "My children," she whispered, "promise me. They'll be cared for, madam. You have my word." Frank tucked the blanket around her and turned to the children. "I need you all to be brave. Jacob, you're in charge till I get back. Keep the fire going just like I showed you." The boy nodded solemnly, standing taller under the responsibility. Frank rode hard through the snow-covered terrain, pushing thunder to a gallop whenever the path allowed. Alpine came into view after an arduous 2-hour journey that should have taken half the time. He headed straight for Dr. Wilson's office, nearly colliding with the physician as he emerged from his building, medical bag in hand. "Zimmerman, I was just about to send someone to check on the Taylor place," the doctor said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "It's bad, Doc. The fever's worse and her breathing." Frank shook his head. "She's a fighter, but those kids, they've got no one else." Dr. Wilson's face grew grave. "Let me gather more supplies. Meet me at the general store in 10 minutes. We'll take my wagon, it'll be better for bringing her back if needed." While waiting, Frank made quick stops at the general store for additional provisions and the telegraph office to send a message to his foreman at the Z-Bar Ranch, informing him he'd be gone for a few days. The journey back to the Taylor homestead was tense, both men lost in thought as they navigated the difficult terrain. Frank had only been in Alpine for 6 months, having purchased the struggling Z-Bar Ranch after years of driving cattle up from Texas to Kansas. He'd wanted to put down roots, to build something lasting after a decade of the transient cowboy life. What he hadn't expected was to find himself drawn into the struggles of a widow and her 4 young children. Upon reaching the cabin, they found Jacob dutifully keeping the fire stoked while Emma tried to soothe the crying Michael. Sarah sat quietly by her mother's bedside, her small hand patting Lillian's arm. Dr. Wilson's examination confirmed Frank's fears. Pneumonia, and a severe case at that. She needs constant care, proper medicine, and better nourishment than she can get out here. He lowered his voice. "Frank, even with the best care, her recovery isn't certain." Frank glanced at the children, making sure they couldn't hear. "What are you saying, Doc?" "I'm saying someone needs to stay here. These children can't manage alone, and moving her to town in this weather might kill her outright." The doctor fixed Frank with a direct gaze. "I know you've got a ranch to run, but I'll stay," Frank interrupted without hesitation. "Got good men running the Z-Bar. I can spare a few days." Those few days stretched into a week as Lillian's condition fluctuated between slight improvements and frightening setbacks. Frank fell into a routine, rising before dawn to tend to the livestock, preparing simple meals for the children, following Dr. Wilson's instructions for Lillian's care, and sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace. The children, initially wary of the quiet cowboy, gradually warmed to his presence. Jacob shadowed him during chores, eager to learn man's work, as he called it. Emma appointed herself Frank's helper with cooking and caring for her mother. Little Sarah would silently hand him tools before he even asked for them, while Michael had taken to trailing after Frank like a devoted puppy. On the 8th day, Frank was repairing a broken shutter when Jacob approached, his young face serious. "Mr. Zimmerman, are you going to leave us when Mama gets better?" Frank set down his hammer, giving the boy his full attention. Your mama's going to need help for a while yet, even after she improves. I don't plan on leaving until she's back on her feet. But what if? Jacob swallowed hard. What if she doesn't get better? My friend Billy's ma got the lung sickness last year and she went to heaven. Frank placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, choosing his words carefully. Your mama's fighting hard, Jacob. But no matter what happens, I promise you won't be alone. You understand? The boy nodded, blinking back tears. Yes, sir. That evening, after the children were asleep, Frank sat beside Lillian's bed, replacing the cool cloth on her forehead. To his surprise, her eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been in days. Water, she whispered. Frank gently lifted her head, helping her take small sips. Easy now. How long? She asked, her voice barely audible. Just over a week since I first came, he replied. Dr. Wilson's been by every other day. Lillian's eyes drifted to the sleeping forms of her children, all piled together on the second bed. They look well cared for. They're good kids. Strong like their mother. A ghost of a smile touched her pale lips. Not strong enough, it seems. Nonsense, Frank said firmly. You're fighting through this day by day. The worst is behind you now. Why are you doing this, Mr. Zimmerman? Lillian asked, studying his face. You're a stranger to us. Frank considered her question. Maybe out here there's no such thing as strangers, just folks who haven't helped each other yet. He adjusted her blanket. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. As January gave way to February, Lillian's health improved gradually. She could sit up for longer periods, even managing to move to a chair by the fire on particularly good days. Frank had sent for more of his personal belongings from the ranch, settling into life at the Taylor homestead with unexpected ease. One afternoon, Lillian watched from her chair as Frank taught Jacob how to whittle a small wooden horse. Sarah and Michael played with rag dolls Frank had purchased in town, while Emma carefully practiced her letters on a slate. You've brought life back to this home, Lillian said softly when Frank approached to check on her. I don't know how to repay you. Seeing you improve is payment enough, he replied, pouring her a cup of the herbal tea Dr. Wilson had prescribed. Besides, your children have grown on me. They adore you, Lillian admitted. Especially Jacob. He needs a man to look up to. An awkward silence fell between them, both aware of the unspoken question about how long this arrangement would continue. The moment was broken when Jacob proudly presented his roughly carved horse to his mother. Mr. Zimmerman says I'm a natural, Mama. He's going to teach me to ride a real horse when the weather warms. Lillian smiled, ruffling her son's hair. Is that so? If it meets with your approval, madam, Frank added quickly. Thought I might bring one of the gentler mares from my ranch once you're well enough to oversee his lessons. That sounds wonderful, Lillian said, noticing how Jacob's eyes lit up at the prospect. It had been months since she'd seen such excitement in her children. That night, after the children were asleep, Frank brought up the subject they'd been avoiding. Mrs. Taylor, Lillian, I need to return to my ranch for a few days. Spring preparations need attention. Her heart sank, though she'd been expecting this moment. Of course, you've already done far more than anyone could ask. I'd like to continue helping, he said carefully. Perhaps I could check in every few days, bring supplies, help with the heavier chores until you're fully recovered. Lillian studied his weathered face, seeing sincerity in his blue eyes. Mr. Zimmerman, Frank, please. Frank, she amended with a small smile. You've been a godsend to us, but I can't keep accepting your charity. We've imposed on your kindness too long already. Frank leaned forward, his expression earnest. It's not charity, Lillian, and there's been no imposition. Truth is, I've found more purpose here in these weeks than I have in years of ranching. He glanced toward the sleeping children. I never had a family of my own, always moving, following the herds. When I finally settled at the Z-bar, I thought land was what I wanted. Now I'm not so sure. Lillian felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her lingering illness. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to keep helping if you'll allow it. No strings attached, just a neighbor lending a hand. After a moment's consideration, Lillian nodded. The children would miss you terribly if you disappeared from their lives. She hesitated before adding softly, and so would I. True to his word, Frank returned to his ranch the next day but came back 3 days later with a wagon full of supplies. A gentle mare for Jacob's promised riding lessons, and a small collection of books for the children. This pattern continued through February, Frank spending 4 or 5 days at the Taylor homestead, then returning to the Z-bar for 2 or 3 days to oversee operations. With each visit, the invisible barrier between them lowered further. Frank no longer slept on a bedroll by the fire, but in a proper bed. They'd moved into the small side room that had once been Thomas's workshop. The children now ran to greet him whenever they heard Thunder's approaching hoofbeats, and even Lillian found herself watching the road on days he was expected to return. By early March, Lillian had regained much of her strength. On a surprisingly warm afternoon, she ventured outside for the first time in weeks, watching as Frank led Jacob around the corral on the gentle mare. Little Michael perched in front of his brother. "Not too fast," she called out, maternal worry momentarily overcoming her appreciation of the scene. Frank smiled reassuringly. "Buttercup here couldn't run if she wanted to. She's older than both these boys put together." Emma sat beside her mother on the porch steps, her small hands busy with mending one of Michael's shirts. "Mr. Frank says I can learn to ride too when I'm a bit bigger," she informed Lillian. "He says girls out west need to know horses just as much as boys." "Does he now?" Lillian replied, watching Frank's patient instruction with new appreciation. Later that evening, after a satisfying dinner of rabbit stew, the family gathered around the fireplace. Frank had taken to reading aloud each night, currently working through a dog-eared copy of Treasure Island that had the children completely enthralled. As his deep voice filled the cabin with tales of adventure, Lillian found herself studying him the way the firelight caught in his beard, how his hands gently turned each page, the special voices he created for different characters. She realized with a start that somewhere along the way, she'd begun to think of him not as a temporary helper, but as something far more permanent. The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. After the children were tucked in, Frank and Lillian sat at the kitchen table, sharing a pot of coffee, a small luxury he'd brought from town. "I received a letter from my sister in San Antonio," Lillian said, breaking their comfortable silence. "She's offered to take us in if the homestead becomes too much." Frank's hand tightened around his cup. "Is that what you want?" "No," she answered truthfully. "This is our home. Thomas and I built it together. His dreams are in these walls." She met Frank's gaze directly. "But I need to be practical. Running this place alone, even once I'm fully recovered, it's a daunting prospect." "You're not alone," Frank said quietly. "Not unless you choose to be." Lillian's heart quickened at his words. "Frank, let me speak plainly," he interrupted, setting down his cup. "These past weeks have shown me what I've been missing all my life, a purpose beyond myself. These children," he paused, collecting himself. "And you, Lillian, you've come to mean more to me than I thought possible." "Frank, we've known each other hardly 2 months," she whispered, though her objection lacked conviction. "I'm 38 years old, Lillian. Spent 20 of those years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. When I bought the Z-bar, I thought land was what I needed." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I was wrong. It wasn't land I was searching for." Lillian felt tears gathering in her eyes. What about your ranch? The Z-Bar will keep. It's only a half-day's ride from here. I could manage both with good hands helping. His thumb gently stroked the back of her hand. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, just permission to keep being part of your lives, all of you. A tear slipped down Lillian's cheek. The children already see you as family. And you? Frank asked softly. Before she could answer, a small voice came from the doorway. Mama, are you crying? They turned to see Emma standing there in her nightgown, her face concerned. Happy tears, sweetheart, Lillian reassured her, quickly wiping her cheeks. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. Emma looked skeptical. Is Mr. Frank leaving again? Frank shook his head. No, Emma. Actually, I was just asking your mama if I could stay for a good long while. Forever? The girl asked hopefully. Frank's eyes remained on Lillian. That would be up to your mama. Emma rushed to her mother's side. Please, Mama, let him stay forever. Jacob says everything's better when Mr. Frank's here, and Sarah doesn't have nightmares anymore. And Michael, Emma, Lillian gently interrupted, smoothing her daughter's hair. Mr. Frank and I need to talk about grown-up things. Back to bed now. After Emma reluctantly returned to the bedroom, an awkward silence fell between them. Children have a way of cutting to the heart of matters, Frank finally said, a smile tugging at his lips. Lillian took a deep breath. Frank, I won't deny there are feelings growing between us, but Thomas has been gone barely 2 years. The children are still healing. I'm still healing. I understand, he said, nodding, and I would never try to replace Thomas in their hearts or yours. I know that, she said softly. You're a good man, Frank Zimmerman, better than we deserve. Now that's where you're wrong, he replied earnestly. If anything, it's the other way around. You and those children have given me something I never thought I'd have. Lillian studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity. What if we take it slowly? You continue staying here when you can, helping with the homestead. We see where the path leads us without making promises neither of us is ready for. Frank's smile warmed his entire face. I'd like that very much, Lillian. With spring's arrival came renewed vigor to the Taylor homestead. Under Frank's guidance, fields that had lain fallow the previous year were prepared for planting. He brought 2 of his ranch hands to help repair the barn roof and expand the chicken coop. The children flourished under the shared attention of both adults, Lillian now fully recovered, and Frank a steady, dependable presence. Word of their arrangement had reached Alpine, of course. Small towns thrived on such talk. Most viewed it pragmatically. A widow with children needed help, and Frank Zimmerman was a respectable rancher with means to provide it. Dr. Wilson and his wife became regular visitors, providing a veneer of propriety that helped quiet the few wagging tongues. As March gave way to April, Frank's stays at the Z-Bar grew shorter, while his time at the Taylor homestead lengthened. One particularly fine spring day, he arrived with his wagon unusually full. What's all this? Lillian asked as the children swarmed around him, each vying to be the first to tell him about their day. Thought it might be time to make things a bit more permanent, Frank replied, somewhat nervously. If that's still agreeable to you. Jacob helped Frank unload the wagon, revealing furniture, books, clothing, and various personal effects. Are you moving in for real, Mr. Frank? The boy asked excitedly. Frank looked to Lillian, waiting for her response. It seems practical, she said carefully, mindful of the children's attentive ears. The back room is certainly more comfortable than constantly traveling between properties. That evening, after the children were asleep, Frank and Lillian sat on the porch swing he'd built the previous month, watching the stars emerge in the clear Texas sky. I spoke with Reverend Gardner in town today, Frank said, his voice deliberately casual. Lillian tensed slightly beside him. Oh, asked him about the propriety of our arrangement. Frank turned to face her. He suggested that for the children's sake, we should consider formalizing things. Frank, not right away, he added quickly, but perhaps we could begin courting properly. Sunday dinners, chaperoned outings, the usual formalities. Lillian couldn't help but laugh softly. We've rather done things backward, haven't we? You've been living under my roof for months, and only now are we talking about courting. Frank's laugh joined hers. I suppose we have. Though to be fair, pneumonia and 4 children make for unusual circumstances. Their laughter faded, leaving a comfortable silence broken only by the rhythmic creaking of the swing and the distant call of a night hawk. I've been thinking about Thomas, Lillian said finally. About what he would want for the children for me. Frank remained quiet, giving her space to continue. He was a good man, a loving father. His last words to me were to be happy, to make sure the children knew joy. She turned to Frank, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. I think he would approve of you, Frank Zimmerman. Frank took her hand gently. That means more to me than you know. I'm ready, Lillian whispered, to begin again, not to forget the past, but to build a future with you if that's still what you want. It's all I want, Frank replied, his voice thick with emotion. He hesitated, then slowly leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration filled with promise. When they parted, Lillian's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I thought that part of my life was over, she admitted. After Thomas died, I couldn't imagine ever feeling this way again. Frank brushed a strand of hair from her face. I never felt it at all, until I found you and those children. The following Sunday, Lillian and the children attended church services in Alpine with Frank at their side. Though they arrived separately, propriety still mattered. They sat together as a family, drawing knowing smiles from many in the congregation. Afterward, during the community luncheon, Reverend Gardner made a point of speaking with them. Mrs. Taylor, Mr. Zimmerman, he greeted warmly. Wonderful to see you both and the children looking so well. Thank you, Reverend, Lillian replied, suddenly self-conscious under the gazes of nearby townspeople. Mr. Zimmerman has spoken to me about your unique situation, the Reverend continued discreetly. I wanted you to know that while some might raise eyebrows, you have the church's support. The welfare of these children is paramount. Frank cleared his throat. Actually, Reverend, if you have a moment, we'd like to discuss the possibility of wedding banns being read in the coming weeks. Lillian's head snapped toward Frank in surprise. Though they had discussed courting, they hadn't yet spoken of marriage so directly. The Reverend's face brightened. That would certainly be the most appropriate resolution. Shall we say 3 Sundays from now for the first reading? Before Lillian could respond, Emma tugged at her skirt. Mama, is Mr. Frank going to be our new papa? She asked, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden lull of surrounding conversations. A hush fell over the nearby churchgoers, all eyes turning to them. Lillian felt her face burning but managed to maintain her composure. That's something Mr. Frank and I are discussing, Emma, she replied quietly. Frank knelt down to Emma's level. Would you like that, Emma? If I became part of your family officially? The little girl nodded vigorously. Jacob says you already are family. You just don't have the right name yet. Laughter rippled through the onlookers, breaking the tension. Frank stood, his face slightly reddened but his eyes never leaving Lillian's. Out of the mouths of babes, Reverend Gardner said with a smile. Shall I mark the calendar for those banns, Mrs. Taylor? Lillian took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes, Reverend, that would be fine. The ride home that afternoon was filled with excited chatter from the children, all except Jacob, who remained uncharacteristically quiet. As they approached the homestead, Frank noticed the boy's silence. "Something on your mind, Jacob?" he asked while helping him down from the wagon. Jacob kicked at the dirt. "If you marry Mama, will we have to call you Father?" Frank considered the question carefully. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Jacob. I know I'm not replacing your pa. He'll always be your father. But you'd be like a father too, right? You'd stay forever." "That's right," Frank confirmed. "I'd be making a promise to your mother and to all of you to be here to care for you, to help you grow into the fine people I know you'll become." Jacob looked up, his young face serious. "My pa used to take me fishing at the creek. He promised to teach me to shoot when I got older." "Those are important things for a boy to learn," Frank agreed. "I'd be honored to teach you when your mother thinks you're ready. Would that be all right? Or would it make my real pa sad?" Frank put a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "I think your pa would be glad someone was there to teach you the things he wanted to. That's what good fathers want for their children to be cared for, even if they can't be there themselves." Jacob seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "I think I'll call you Frank for now, if that's okay. But maybe someday." "That sounds perfect," Frank replied, emotion catching in his throat. "No rush on any of it." As they joined the others at the house, Lillian caught Frank's eye, raising a questioning eyebrow. He gave a slight nod, letting her know that all was well. That evening, after the children were asleep, Frank found Lillian sitting alone on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the spring evening chill. "I should apologize for speaking to Reverend Gardner about wedding banns without discussing it with you first," he said, sitting beside her. "I got ahead of myself." "Yes, you did," she agreed, though there was no anger in her tone. "But I can't say I'm upset about it. It forced a conversation we've been dancing around." Frank took her hand. "I want to do right by you, Lillian, by all of you." "I know," she said softly. "And you have, from the moment you arrived during that snowstorm." Jacob had some concerns, Frank told her, recounting their conversation. Lillian nodded, unsurprised. "He remembers Thomas the most clearly. The others, especially Michael, they're too young to have many memories." "I would never try to erase those memories," Frank assured her. "I know that too." She squeezed his hand. "You've been so patient, so understanding with all of us. That's why I can say yes to those banns with a clear conscience and a full heart." Frank's face broke into a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "Though we should still observe a proper courtship period, for the children's sake as much as for appearances." "Of course," he agreed readily. "I'll move my things back to the Z-Bar tomorrow." Lillian laughed softly. "Perhaps not all your things. The children would be distraught if you disappeared completely. But separate sleeping quarters until after the wedding seems appropriate." "Reverend Gardner would approve," Frank said with a grin. "And when might this wedding be?" "Early summer," Lillian decided. "After the spring planting is done, but before the full heat of summer arrives." "June, then," Frank suggested. "A new beginning." The following week saw Alpine abuzz with news of the upcoming nuptials. While a few disapproving whispers circulated about the speed of the arrangement, most townspeople viewed it as the natural conclusion to Frank's months of assistance to the Taylor family. Dr. Wilson's wife organized a small group of women to help Lillian prepare for the wedding. They gathered at the Taylor homestead one afternoon, bringing fabric for a new dress, preserved fruits for the wedding feast, and plenty of well-intentioned advice. "You're fortunate, Lillian," Martha Wilson commented as they worked on the dress. "Frank Zimmerman is one of the most eligible men in the county. Several young ladies in town had their caps set for him when he first arrived." Lillian's fingers stilled on the fabric. "I hadn't realized." "Oh yes," another woman chimed in. "Margaret Preston was practically throwing her daughter at him at every social event. The girl was heartbroken when word got out about you too. It wasn't exactly planned, Lillian said softly. He came to help when we needed it most, and somehow. Sometimes the best unions grow from practical beginnings, Martha assured her. My own grandmother used to say that love built on friendship and respect lasts longer than one built on passion alone. Though a bit of passion doesn't hurt, added Alina Jenkins with a knowing smile, causing the women to dissolve into laughter. Lillian found herself blushing, thinking of the increasingly tender moments she and Frank shared during their proper courtship, lingering glances across the dinner table, fingers brushing while doing chores, stolen kisses when the children weren't looking. At the Z-Bar Ranch, Frank was enduring good-natured teasing from his ranch hands as he prepared for married life. Never thought I'd see the day, his foreman, Bill Cooper, remarked as they mended fences. Frank Zimmerman, confirmed bachelor, taking on a ready-made family of 5. Best decision I ever made, Frank replied without hesitation. Those kids are lucky, Bill said more seriously. Not many men would step up like you have. Frank drove a fence post into the ground with more force than necessary. They're good children. And Lillian, she's extraordinary. Keeping that homestead going after her husband died, nearly dying herself this winter, yet never complaining. Bill nodded thoughtfully. You planning to move them all to the ranch house? We've discussed it, Frank said. The ranch house is bigger, better built. But that homestead means a lot to Lillian, to all of them. It's where the children were born, where their father is buried. Could always keep both, Bill suggested. Use the homestead land for extra grazing, maybe build it up over time. The idea took root in Frank's mind. That evening he rode to the Taylor homestead with a proposal. Lillian listened as Frank outlined his thoughts. We could make this place part of the Z-Bar, he explained, spreading a roughly drawn map on the table. Connect the properties, improve the buildings here over time. The children could grow up knowing both places as home. You wouldn't mind keeping this place? Lillian asked, surprised. Even though your ranch house is larger. This homestead is part of who you are, who the children are, Frank said simply. I wouldn't take that away. Besides, he added with a smile, a man with a growing family needs all the land he can get. Lillian raised an eyebrow. Growing family, Frank's cheeks reddened slightly. I just meant that is, if you wanted someday, she laughed, enjoying his rare moment of flustered speech. I'm not opposed to the idea, Frank, though perhaps we should get through the wedding first. As June approached, the homestead transformed. Frank's ranch hands helped construct additional rooms onto the cabin, expanding it to comfortably accommodate the joined family. A proper garden was planted, the barn repaired, and new furniture crafted by the town's carpenter was delivered. The children thrived under the stability of their new arrangement. Jacob had taken to accompanying Frank on his trips to the Z-Bar, proudly learning the basics of ranching. Emma's reading improved dramatically with Frank's patient tutoring each evening. Sarah, always the quietest, began to emerge from her shell, often following Frank around with a stream of previously bottled-up questions. And little Michael, who barely remembered a time before Frank, had taken to calling him Pa, despite no encouragement to do so. The first time it happened, during dinner one evening in late May, the table fell silent. Pa, more milk, please, Michael said, pushing his cup toward Frank without a second thought. Frank froze, his eyes darting to Lillian, then to Jacob, unsure how to respond. Jacob broke the tense silence. He's little, he doesn't remember our real Pa, he said pragmatically. It's okay if he calls you that, Frank swallowed hard. Only if everyone's comfortable with it, Emma shrugged. You do all the things a Pa does, you're marrying Mama, it makes sense. Sarah, Lillian asked gently, noting her second daughter's thoughtful expression. "I think my first daddy wouldn't mind," Sarah said quietly, "because he loved us and would want us to be happy." Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes at her daughter's simple wisdom. Frank looked equally moved. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That means more than you know." The day before the wedding, Lillian visited Thomas's grave alone. The small plot rested on a gentle rise overlooking the homestead, marked by a wooden cross Frank had helped Jacob carve to replace the weathered original. "I hope you understand," she whispered, placing wildflowers at the base of the cross. "He's a good man, Thomas. Different from you, but good in his own way. The children need him, I need him." A warm breeze rustled the grass around her, carrying the scent of summer flowers. "I'll make sure they never forget you," she promised. "Your stories will be told, your memory honored." She touched the cross gently. "I loved you truly, Thomas Taylor. Now I've found room in my heart to love again. I believe you'd want that for me." As she turned to leave, she saw Frank standing at a respectful distance, his hat in his hands. He'd clearly given her privacy but wanted to be nearby. "Thank you for waiting," she said as she approached him. "Seemed right that you should have this moment," he replied. "I wanted to pay my respects too, if that's all right," Lillian nodded, deeply touched by his sensitivity. "I think he would have liked you, Frank. You're both stubborn, hard-working men who put family first." Frank smiled slightly. "High praise indeed." He took her hand. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "More than ready," she assured him. "The children are practically bursting with excitement. Mrs. Wilson took them to town to stay at her house tonight, part of the tradition. She insisted." "The house feels empty without them," Frank admitted. "It does," Lillian agreed. "But after tomorrow, it never will be again." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. The entire community of Alpine gathered for the event, which had become something of a local celebration. The ceremony took place under a canopy of trees near the Taylor homestead, with Reverend Gardner officiating. Lillian wore a simple but elegant dress of pale blue, with Emma and Sarah as her attendants in matching smaller versions. Jacob stood proudly at Frank's side, taking his role as best man with utmost seriousness, while Michael served as ring bearer, carefully carrying a small cushion with two simple gold bands, as Lillian walked toward Frank, escorted by Dr. Wilson in place of her long-deceased father. She felt a profound sense of rightness. The path that had brought them together had been marked by hardship and loss, but had led to this moment of new beginnings. The vows were traditional but spoken with deep sincerity. When Frank promised to love, honor, and cherish Lillian and to be a father to her children, his voice carried across the gathering with unwavering certainty. When Lillian promised the same, adding her pledge to build a life together as one family, many in the audience dabbed at their eyes. The moment that most touched the gathered community, however, came after the formal vows were exchanged. Frank knelt down to eye level with all four children who stood in a semicircle beside their mother. "Jacob, Emma, Sarah, and Michael," he said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly. "Today I make promises to you as well. I promise to care for you, to guide you, to respect the memory of your father while helping you grow into the people you're meant to become. I promise to love your mother and to make our home a place of safety and joy. Will you accept me into your family?" The children's responses varied. Jacob gave a solemn nod. Emma beamed and said, "Yes." Sarah whispered her agreement, and Michael launched himself into Frank's arms with a gleeful paw. But the sentiment was unanimous. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as Frank stood, lifting Michael in one arm while keeping his other hand extended to Lillian. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Gardner proclaimed, his own voice thick with emotion, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, and declare you a family united before God and this community." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables laden with food set up in the yard, musicians playing lively tunes for dancing, children running and playing games organized by the schoolteacher. Frank and Lillian moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone in Alpine. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a magical glow over the continuing festivities. Frank found Lillian sitting with Mrs. Wilson, watching the dancing. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked, extending his hand with a formal bow that made her laugh. "I believe you may, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the cleared area serving as a dance floor. As they moved to the gentle melody, Frank held her close. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she answered truthfully. "Look at them." She nodded toward the children, Jacob proudly teaching Sarah to dance while Emma spun in circles with Michael, all four laughing with uninhibited joy. "We've given them something precious," Frank observed. "A family made whole again." "You gave us that," Lillian corrected him. "When you rode through that snowstorm with medicine and stayed to help a sick woman and her frightened children." "Best detour I ever took," Frank said, his eyes crinkling with his smile. "Though I wouldn't call it chance. Something larger was at work that day, divine providence." Lillian suggested, "Or simply the way life unfolds when you follow your heart instead of just your head." As the evening wound down, guests began departing with final congratulations. The children, exhausted from excitement and celebration, were put to bed in their newly arranged rooms, Jacob and Michael sharing one, Emma and Sarah another, with the master bedroom now properly belonging to Frank and Lillian. Alone at last, Frank took Lillian's hands in his. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, leading her to the window. In the moonlight, she could see a new structure taking shape near Thomas's grave, a small white fence enclosing the area, with what appeared to be a bench beside it. "I thought it should be a proper place for remembrance," Frank explained. "Somewhere you and the children can go to feel close to him, to talk to him if you need to." Tears filled Lillian's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Frank, that's thank you." "I know he'll always be part of your lives," Frank said seriously. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Lillian placed her hand against his cheek. "You are an extraordinary man, Frank Zimmerman." "Just a man who found what he never knew he was looking for," he replied, drawing her into his arms. The summer of 1879 flowed into autumn, bringing with it harvests from the expanded garden, cattle drives from the Z-Bar that now included the Taylor homestead as part of its operation, and a rhythm to their blended family life that felt increasingly natural. Frank taught Jacob to shoot, as promised, using an old rifle that had been Thomas's. The boy showed a natural aptitude that made Frank suspect he'd make an excellent ranch hand and possibly more as he grew older. Emma's skills with numbers emerged, leading Frank to put her in charge of counting cattle during the smaller drives, much to her delight. Sarah revealed a surprising talent with horses, somehow able to gentle even the most skittish colts. And Michael shadowed his older siblings and new pa with equal enthusiasm, soaking up knowledge like the dry Texas earth absorbed rare rainfall. Lillian flourished as well, her health fully restored, her confidence growing as the homestead prospered under their joint management. The additional income from the Z-Bar allowed for improvements that had been mere dreams during the lean years after Thomas's death: a proper cookstove, glass windows to replace oiled paper, sturdy furniture crafted by the town carpenter. In late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children were abed, Lillian rested her head against Frank's shoulder. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Frank responded, his arm comfortably around her. Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. She took his hand, guiding it to rest against her still flat stomach. We'll have a new addition come spring. Frank's body went completely still, then he turned to face her, his eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. Truly, Lillian nodded, smiling at his reaction. Truly, Doctor. Wilson thinks late April or early May. Frank let out a whoop that probably woke the children, then immediately apologized before gathering Lillian into a gentle but enthusiastic embrace. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you pleased? She asked, pulling back to see his face. Please doesn't begin to describe it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought at my age, after so many years alone, you're hardly ancient, Frank, Lillian laughed. Plenty of men become fathers much later in life. But this with you, it's more than I ever dared hope for. They sat in contented silence for several minutes, both contemplating the new life growing within her. We should wait to tell the children, Lillian finally said. Until we're further along. Frank nodded agreement. Though I suspect they'll be thrilled. They've been asking for a baby brother or sister since the wedding. Have they now? Lillian raised an eyebrow. And you didn't think to mention this to me? I didn't want to presume, Frank said, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. It seemed presumptuous to assume you'd want more children. Lillian kissed him softly. I always hoped for a large family. Thomas and I had planned on at least 6 before he was taken from us. 6, Frank's eyes widened. Well, we're halfway there already. 5, she corrected. And soon to be 6. Unless you've decided the current 4 aren't yours as well. You know better than that, he said seriously. From the day I married you, they became mine in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. As they predicted, when they finally told the children about the expected baby at Christmas, the news was met with excitement. Jacob nodded approvingly, as though the addition simply made logical sense. Emma immediately began making lists of possible names. Sarah quietly touched Lillian's growing belly with reverent fingers, and Michael, now 3, simply asked if the baby would be big enough to play with him. Winter passed more comfortably than any in recent memory. The expanded cabin stayed warm against the Texas chill, with plenty of firewood stacked by Frank and Jacob. Food stores were abundant, supplemented by fresh game that Frank or his ranch hands regularly provided. Evenings were spent with books. Music from the small piano Frank had surprised Lillian with at Christmas, and increasingly elaborate stories that Frank invented for the children's entertainment. As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, neighbors and friends from Alpine regularly checked in, bringing dishes, offering help with the children, or simply providing female companionship that Lillian had lacked during her years of widowhood. Mrs. Wilson visited most frequently, her own children grown and moved away, clearly enjoying her role as surrogate grandmother to the Taylor-Zimmerman brood. Frank, meanwhile, split his time between managing the combined properties and ensuring Lillian had everything she needed. He expanded his workforce at the Z Bar, promoting Bill Cooper to foreman with expanded responsibilities so he could spend more time at the homestead. You don't need to hover so much, Lillian told him one afternoon as she caught him watching her fold laundry with a concerned expression. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I know, he admitted sheepishly. I just want everything to be perfect for you, for all of you. Lillian set down the shirt she was folding and went to him, taking his hands in hers. It already is perfect, Frank. Not because everything goes smoothly every day, but because we're facing life together. April arrived with its characteristic Texas wildflowers and unpredictable weather. Lillian's time drew near, with Dr. Wilson making increasingly frequent visits to check on her progress. Frank grew more anxious with each passing day, much to the amusement of the children. "Pa's going to wear a path in the floor," Jacob observed one evening as Frank paced while Lillian experienced practice contractions. "Your pa is just concerned," Lillian explained, wincing slightly as another tightening gripped her abdomen. "Were you this nervous when we were born?" Emma asked innocently. Lillian exchanged a glance with Frank. "Your father was nervous with each of you," she said truthfully. "Though he handled it differently. He would go outside and chop wood until the midwife called him in." "Perhaps I should follow his example," Frank muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Perhaps you should sit down and read to the children," Lillian suggested with a pointed look, "before you make us all as nervous as you are." The labor began in earnest 3 days later, during a gentle spring rain that pattered against the new glass windows. Mrs. Wilson had come to stay 2 days prior, anticipating the event, and took charge of the children while Dr. Wilson attended to Lillian. Frank was banished to the main room after his anxious hovering proved too distracting. "This isn't my first time, Frank," Lillian had reminded him as another contraction built. "I know what I'm doing." Reluctantly, he joined the children, attempting to distract them and himself with games and stories. Jacob, observing Frank's thinly disguised anxiety, suggested they repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. "Rain's letting up," the boy pointed out. "And Mama said keeping busy helps." Frank looked at the boy with newfound appreciation. At 9 years old, Jacob was showing wisdom beyond his years. "You're right. Let's go." They worked side by side, the physical labor helping to channel Frank's nervous energy. Jacob handed tools, held boards, and asked thoughtful questions about ranching that kept Frank's mind at least partially occupied. When they returned, mud splattered but calmer, Emma met them at the door, her face alight with excitement. "Dr. Wilson says it won't be long now, Mrs. Wilson is heating water, and we can hear Mama sometimes." Frank washed quickly and resumed his vigil outside the bedroom door, jumping at each sound from within. When Lillian's cries grew stronger, he paced more vigorously, causing little Michael to watch him with worried eyes. "Is Mama hurt?" the boy asked, his lower lip trembling. Frank immediately knelt beside him. "No, son. Having a baby is hard work and sometimes it hurts, but your Mama is strong. She's done this before with each of you." "Did it hurt when I was born?" Michael wondered. "I expect so," Frank answered honestly. "But your Mama says the pain is forgotten the moment the baby is placed in her arms. That's how much she loves you all." A particularly sharp cry from the bedroom made Frank wince and rise to his feet. Before he could resume pacing, the cry was replaced by a different sound, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Frank froze, his heart seeming to stop before racing ahead at double speed. The children gathered around him, all 5 of them holding their breath as they waited for news. The door opened and Dr. Wilson emerged, his face tired but wreathed in a broad smile. "Congratulations, Frank, you have a healthy son." "A son," Frank repeated, his voice barely audible. "And Lillian, doing wonderfully," the doctor assured him. "She's asking for you all, Mrs. Wilson appeared behind the doctor. "Children first, I think. Just for a moment, then your mother needs rest." The 4 older children filed into the bedroom, their faces a mixture of awe and excitement as they approached the bed where Lillian reclined against pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your brother," she invited, her voice tired but joyful. They gathered around, peering at the red, wrinkled face partially visible among the swaddling cloths. "He's so tiny," Sarah whispered. "He's perfect," Emma declared. "Will he get bigger?" Michael asked practically. "Every day," Lillian assured him. "Just like you did." Jacob studied the infant solemnly. "What's his name?" Lillian glanced toward the doorway where Frank stood, seemingly unable to move closer. "We thought we'd call him Thomas Franklin Zimmerman, to honor both his fathers." Frank's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, he approached the bed. The children parted to make room for him as he knelt beside Lillian, one trembling hand reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "Welcome to our family, Mrs." Wilson gently herded the children out, promising them more time with their new brother after their mother had rested. Left alone with Lillian and the baby, Frank struggled to find words. "Would you like to hold your son?" Lillian asked softly. With infinite care, Frank gathered the tiny bundle into his arms, cradling the newborn with a mixture of terror and adoration. "I've never held one so small before," he admitted. "You're doing fine," Lillian assured him, watching the two with tired contentment. "What do you think of his name?" "I wanted to surprise you." Frank's eyes, suspiciously bright, met hers. "It's perfect. A way to honor the past while embracing our future." Little Thomas thrived in the loving environment of the blended family. The children took their roles as older siblings seriously. Jacob appointed himself protector. Emma became a second mother hen. Sarah sang soft lullabies she remembered from her own childhood. And Michael proudly demonstrated big brother skills he was still mastering himself. As spring gave way to summer, life at the combined Taylor-Zimmerman homestead fell into new rhythms. Frank continued managing both properties, but arranged his schedule to spend more time at home with his expanding family. The Z-Bar prospered under his direction, with cattle drives becoming larger and more profitable each season. In July, as they celebrated little Thomas's 3-month birthday with a small gathering of friends from town, Dr. Wilson pulled Frank aside. "You've done a remarkable thing here, Zimmerman," he said, gesturing to the thriving homestead and the laughing children playing in the yard. "I've done nothing special," Frank demurred. "Just what any decent man would do." The doctor shook his head. "We both know that's not true." A widow with 4 young children, isolated, desperately ill, most men would have delivered the medicine and gone on their way, duty done. Frank watched as Lillian moved among their guests, baby Thomas in her arms, her face animated as she spoke with Mrs. Wilson. "I couldn't leave," he said simply. "From that first night, something told me this was where I belonged." "Providence," Dr. Wilson nodded. "Sometimes life's detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Frank and Lillian sat on their porch swing, baby Thomas slumbering in his mother's arms. "Happy?" Frank asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Completely," she replied, leaning into him. "I never imagined, during those dark days last winter, that life could be this full again." Frank kissed her temple. "Thank you for letting me be part of your family, for trusting me with your children." "Our children," Lillian corrected gently. "Our children," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at the sleeping infant. "All 5 of them." "Perhaps 6 someday," Lillian suggested with a sly smile. "Or 7. You did say you wanted a large family." Frank laughed softly. "One miracle at a time, Mrs. Zimmerman." As the stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, they sat in contented silence, the gentle creaking of the swing marking the passage of time. From within the house came the soft sounds of sleeping children, Jacob's occasional murmur, Emma's light snore, Sarah's rhythmic breathing, Michael's sighs, and baby Thomas's tiny snuffles. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, answered by another. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees Frank had planted that spring, trees that would grow tall and strong as the children grew. On the hill overlooking the homestead, the small fenced area around Thomas Taylor's grave stood as a respectful reminder of the past, while all around them, The thriving ranch spoke of the present and future they were building together. "I love you, Frank Zimmerman," Lillian said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "And I love you, Lillian Zimmerman," he replied, "more than I ever thought possible." In that peaceful moment, with his family safe under one roof and the woman he loved beside him, Frank reflected on the strange turns life could take. A simple errand of mercy during a snowstorm had led him to everything he'd never known he wanted: a family to call his own, children to raise, a woman to love, and a purpose greater than himself. As if reading his thoughts, Lillian spoke. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the darkest moments." Frank nodded, thinking of her illness that had brought him to her door, of the struggle and pain that had forged their unlikely bond. "From sickness to health," he murmured. "From solitude to family." "From strangers to loved ones," Lillian added. The baby stirred in her arms, his tiny fingers flexing before relaxing again. Frank gently stroked his son's cheek, marveling at the perfection of this new life they had created together. "I used to think a man made his own way in the world," Frank reflected. "That strength meant standing alone. I was wrong." "How so?" "True strength is found in connection, in loving others enough to stand with them through whatever comes." He tightened his arm around her shoulders. "You and the children taught me that." As the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the ranch they'd built together, Frank and Lillian remained on the porch, counting their blessings and planning their future, a future bright with promise, rich with love, and secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed. The once lonely cowboy and the once desperate widow had created something beautiful from the ashes of hardship, a family bound not just by circumstance or convenience, but by the deepest kind of love, one that chooses every day to remain, to care, to build, and to grow together. And in the years that followed, as the Taylor-Zimmerman family expanded further, as the children grew tall and strong under Frank's guidance, as the combined ranch prospered, they would look back on that desperate winter of 1879 not as a time of hardship, but as the beginning of their greatest blessing, the moment when a detour during a snowstorm led a solitary cowboy to the doorstep of a woman and 4 children who would become his reason for being.